Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, April 26, 2023, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the past few days. And as we do each week, we'll get to those answers in a few minutes, but as we do each week, we take our stories, our themes that we cover here in question format. We take those 3 themes from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays, and that's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And if you're wondering what SMIE is, that's Social Media and International Education. That's the name of the consulting company that I created 9 years ago. It's also the title for our roundup and our newsletter. So on the newsletter version, that comes out Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. If you subscribe via our website, and I'll be putting the links to our website where you can sign up for the newsletter, the most recent edition of that e-newsletter, and then also the version of that you can find on LinkedIn. If you choose to get your international ed news via LinkedIn, certainly can subscribe to that. Between those 2 formats, we've got well over 1,000 coming on 1,100 subscribers in international education that get this news every Monday in their inboxes. So we take those news stories that are social media and international ed related. We look at where the themes that might be developing around are common news stories around a couple different elements, 3 different stories each week, and we put those together in this roundup format and cover that a little bit more in depth. So let's get right into it. Thanks again for those of you who are watching live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter channels for SMIE. We endeavor each week to provide you the kind of content here that's beyond just those initial hot takes about what these news stories mean, but see where those themes are that might have implications for what we do in international education and give our thoughts on where we all can benefit. Now, first question of the day is, how vital is India to U.S. international educators? And anybody who's been in the business for more than a minute has known that the Indian market has largely been a graduate-focused market over the last 20, 30 years. And at one point before mid-noughties, India was the largest sender of students to the U.S., and they were replaced by China in about 2005, 2006. And since then, up until this past Open Doors report for November 2022, we realized that China was losing ground, but they had been number 1 and had as of last November. But recent data that will come out through SEVP and their See Us by the Numbers and other reports, certainly that we get and we'll get by the fall of new international students coming and that type of thing, we'll see India far surpass China in terms of not only new international students coming to the U.S., but total international students currently studying in the U.S. India will surpass China as the new number 1, or regain their title, so to speak, after almost 20 years. But India, in sheer volume, will always be, along with China, the biggest 2 markets for international education. Another reason India is becoming more and more prominent, we see increased focus on the demographics within India versus China. India is growing and about to, if they haven't already, surpass China as the largest country in the world, population-wise, not just sending student-wise. You've seen their middle class begin to really take off. You've seen Indian students having a greater option in terms of where they can go for their higher education. And there are those kind of push factors out from India because of the limited number of spaces at quality institutions that Indian students have available to them in an insanely competitive entry requirement, or entry testing requirement to Indian top universities. So it is very much an outbound student market for Indians who want to get their higher education abroad, some or all of it. Some choose to do their their bachelor's program in country, and in the past and still today, that's where the majority of Indian students that are coming to the United States are coming for graduate studies, having already done bachelor's degree probably in country, and are now looking for that graduate program abroad. And that will continue to be, for just because the volume of that market continue to be the largest single source of Indian students coming will be graduate for the foreseeable future, and increasingly so because of the rise of many STEM masters and doctoral programs that have developed in the past few years beyond the traditional engineering, mathematics, science programs. You've seen a lot more business programs be written to be more STEM focused and allow them to get that extra work permission. And that you can't undervalue how important job prospects are, length of post-study work and a job market in your country for prospective students as they look at it. And we'll cover some of that a little bit further on in our conversation today. And actually, all three stories will have that element of importance of work permission in your country, in the United States, for STEM students. Obviously, you see that is such an important tool and has been for many years to attract students from India to the United States. They represent the largest, by far, the greater majority of OPT students in the United States are Indian. Also for H-1Bs, the next level after students who want to continue working would progress to as international students in the United States. So as we do with this topic, we want to present some important examples of how India is, how vital it is to the U.S. international education community. One of my colleagues, a former Education USA advisor from Mumbai, has now been working at the U.S. consulate in Mumbai for a number of years, Behruz Vari. She has sent me information about a grant out of the U.S. Embassy or U.S. Consulate in Mumbai. It's actually for the U.S. mission in India. They're seeking up to a $250,000 grant for individuals or groups to create a digital guide on internationalization with the theme of simplifying U.S.-India higher education institution collaboration and partnerships, which will assist individuals interested in creating linkages between higher ed institutions in the U.S. and India. So this is a quite substantial grant, $250,000, that the U.S. mission in India is looking for folks in the United States and India to develop a digital guide to higher ed relationships between Indian and U.S. Institutions. So clearly, investment by the U.S. mission in India to develop this resource for many U.S. institutions that are going to be looking to develop closer ties with Indian universities in the years to come. You've seen this on top of American Association of Universities put together a proposal to take the lead on developing partnerships between the U.S. and India on the higher ed side. So you see a focus by the government, you see a focus by the U.S. Higher Ed Association world to come together and help to provide resources to that, to help facilitate future ties between U.S. and Indian institutions. That's one piece of this puzzle. Just the sheer volume of why India will continue to be vital is because of the numbers that we're seeing, increasing interest in our programs because of the work permission, as we talked about earlier. And you also see the resources being put into the consulates and the capacity of U.S. consulates and embassy in India to reach more and more Indian students. You see the plan to invite a record number of Indian students to the United States this fall. Part of that plan is increasing visa interview appointments by 30%. Last year, there were over 125,000 Indian students that came into the United States that were were receiving new visas to attend U.S. institutions. They want to go 30% more interview slots this summer to help increase that number from 125,000 last year to probably closer to 150, 160, 170,000 actual students entering new in the fall. So that's a huge investment, again, of time and resources. We've had the recent reopening or the opening of a new U.S. consulate in Hyderabad that will help get those visa appointments because Hyderabad and Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, that area has a large percentage of international students that come, or Indian students that come to the U.S., come through that U.S. consulate. And now they've got a new consulate with 75 to 100 windows, visa interview windows, and so real capacity to help meet that 30% jump in appointments. So that's encouraging to see. And you also see just the numbers on Indian students who are applying for or interested in going to the United States that are securing educational loans in country to attend universities in the U.S., how those numbers have jumped up considerably in the last year, 1.7 times their previous high. So you see some really positive signs to India in terms of a source, in terms of U.S. government resources being committed to help on the higher ed partnership side, and that's always encouraging to see governments wanting to do, U.S. governments wanting to get involved and help facilitate those relationships. You also see just the demographics in the markets growing and growing, and how the U.S., because of its work permission ability promises, have continually attracted Indian students in larger numbers over the last decade. So we'll see just that continue to grow. There's even an article that we'll have in next week's newsletter that's saying India will be the shining light for international education around the world through at least 2050. So there's going to be a long trajectory of growth for India to our market. So moving on to our second question of the day. How can your messaging play to your strengths? Now, this is something more not just hypothetical in that your messaging should always reflect your relative value in the market, what your value propositions are. But how can you play to your strengths when there might not be a strength you normally associate with your institution internationally, or certainly not domestic. You might not associate your institution with this domestically, but internationally might have a very significant value. And when in certain markets we talk about the price sensitivity of one market compared to the value proposition of another market, compared to the post-study work options of another market like India, as we were just talking about, having different parts of your messaging that you might not have as a value for domestic markets might be incredibly important internationally. And this is where there are and have to be differences in how you speak to your prospective audiences that are next door, next state, next city over, but with other regions within the United States, comparing those value propositions to what your value propositions might and should be, or elements of your value that should be highlighted more in international student conversations than perhaps you would domestically. You see these kind of struggles popping up every once in a while, and the obvious need for differentiation. I came into an institution where I'd been consulting, and when I first started, the international students did not get any messaging that was different from what domestic students got. They were the same messages, and they were incorrect messages that didn't reflect anything that made sense from an international student perspective, and it actually caused some confusion in reality with what those messages were trying to say, perhaps, for example, about financial aid. When international students get the same messages as your domestic students, and without thinking, you send international student something about the FAFSA form or need-based financial aid that you don't actually offer to international students. They're still getting that message. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Things later in the pipeline after post-admit, and there are messages there that don't make sense. If you don't require deposits for international students, then don't send them that letter. If you have different requirements, they have a different orientation start date. Obviously, those need to be accommodated, but other things that might normally get sent to a prospective domestic student shouldn't necessarily go to an international student. So there's a lot of differences that you need to be aware of. But the reason this topic comes up this week is because of a new survey that was, as the survey results have been out for a couple of weeks, but were a flurry of stories in the past few days about this particular survey and what it meant for international educators. And the survey basically said that for certain markets, and it mentioned East Asian markets, that the issue of or not only East Asian markets, but those where issues of housing availability and post-study work promises or ability, with those two issues, that represented a reason why students would not go to particular markets if they did not have the guarantee of affordable housing. That we saw the picture in a story in the Pi News a couple of weeks ago of an international student in Australia having to use a tent to pay $300 Australian dollars a week to have their tent with a couple coolers and some luggage around on the outside in somebody's living room. They were paying to live in a tent inside a living room. 300 Australian dollars a week. So housing is becoming increasingly an issue in terms of affordability. We saw stories last fall of British universities that were saying, don't come if you don't have housing. That's happening in a couple places in Canada where they weren't getting that message of don't come, but when they got there, there wasn't the housing available because there just isn't in the kind of community they were moving into. So there's some real challenges in terms of what this survey revealed, and this is the survey I'm talking about is IDP's Emerging Futures Survey. 21,000 students, 100 plus countries were surveyed, and the results were fairly significant. But they talk about how in the cost of living and housing costs and post-study work availability, those were factors that would determine which way students would go in their studies, which countries they go to. And this is a fact that I keep on drilling home to my U.S. colleagues is your students who are applying to you are looking not only at you and perhaps one other U.S. school, but they're looking at multiple countries as possible destinations, and potentially one or two universities in each of those countries that might be on their list or that they're physically going to be applying to. So how are you keeping your message in alignment that appeals to students who have these various issues? And they have some examples in markets where you might want to focus a little bit more on, hey, if you do have affordable housing and plentiful housing, that's something you want to highlight to your prospective student audiences at this point, because that is something that if they are looking at you and the UK or Australia where housing is a real challenge in certain cities and there just isn't any that is affordable for students, what are you going to do? If you have that as a strength card, as a kind of a ace in the hole, so to speak, that's something you want to have available and make known to your prospective students, international students, because it is a significant issue that they're dealing with in multiple countries right now. So if this is an advantage, you might never thought of having a plentiful housing on campus as being a highlight that you want to make sure international students know about. But this kind of a study shows you that can and will make a difference if they know it's an issue, or it's an advantage for you. So they don't know what they don't know. So if you haven't told them that yet, it's a missed opportunity if you're not getting that messaging out to them. So have some messaging that's adaptable, that you can plug and play kind of messaging throughout the flow that you're putting out to students. And knowing what those issues are on a global scale helps inform what kind of messaging you should be putting out to students as they go through their days. So that's just a quick look at how important I think that piece is. Messaging is that reflects awareness of what those issues are in the global marketplace, so that you can better adapt what your strengths are in various times, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. What students are impacted by has changed, and what they feel most important has changed. So have you adapted your messaging flow to meet that need? And play to strengths that you have, meet obviously questions and needs that they have in the market where you might not be the best in the flashiest responses, but at least you can say you're responsive. But also have the ability to plug and play some different messaging that highlights different strengths of your institution and values that you have that you might not normally make available to domestic students, but they matter more to an international audience. So have that available and that capacity in your messaging to get out content to future students and parents that will put them at ease and let them know that you have resources on campus to take care of their needs in their community to help them better adapt. So that always is a positive when you can do that. Now, a last question of the day is I want to talk about something that about these surveys, what they tell us about ourselves as international educators. And these surveys that we've been seeing, I mentioned earlier the IDP survey. There's been a few articles about that, but the importance of having that's what factors are forcing them to reconsider the surveys, and keeping your fingers on the pulse. And yes, all these flash surveys aren't all created equal because they either have very small sample sizes or have demographics that perhaps don't reflect the actual makeup of overall students coming studying globally. Like this IDP one had their top two sources. Nigeria was actually their largest source, then India, then China, Ghana, Philippines. So these are the markets that IDP is most heavily invested in. So they're reflective of the numbers, perhaps. Kind of more in China than I thought they might have, because they haven't been particularly strong there in the past, but seems to be gaining strength there. But their top 10 include, after those four, Philippines, Pakistan, Kenya, Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia. So a good cross section of the globe. Obviously, nothing in the Western Hemisphere for that in that mix, but certainly. For where over 70% of the world's population are coming from Asia, you do see the levels of what we have coming in as pretty significant. But what it tells us, these surveys tell us about ourselves, is how we respond is whether we have that kind of content we're talking about earlier that reflects what who we are as an institution and values that are most important to overseas audiences. But the Emerging Futures report, number 3, I guess, third version of this, it has, when it looks at the top 4 destination markets for students that are using IDP, Canada, Australia, USA, and UK, all were asked, well, how do you rank them? First choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice. And within as first choice, all of the countries are ranked between 18% for the UK as a low, up to 27% for Canada as a high. So that's 9% difference. So all fairly close together. So for international students that are looking at Western markets, they're hedging their bets. They're not all in on Canada. They're not all in on Australia. I mean, a lot of those countries will have messaging that goes out that will reflect that in market, but it's not a runaway for any one country, which is good. It shows that competition is out there, that students are flexible in terms of they are considering multiple countries, that no one has a majority, no one has more than 27% in these top 4. So it's pretty split. But if you look at top first or second choice, Canada is leading with 48%, US is in second with 44%, Australia in third with 41%, UK at 36%. But if you look at third choice, it's a little bit different in terms of volume numbers, but altogether, Canada does lead overall, and Australia is in second, USA in third, UK in fourth, New Zealand in long distance fifth. So there's just where the numbers are. These surveys are showing kind of that students out there are considering multiple destination countries, and we've talked about that many times here on the Roundup. But the reality of that situation means that we have to be hyper aware of what students in certain markets are most concerned about. And some of the emerging trends report talks about what that looks like in terms of primary factors. It had been in the past. And this is where there are some differences between these surveys about what's most important, but quality has always kind of been that number one, and this IDP survey reflects that overall. Then it says good employment opportunities after graduation. First time over 53% have said that is one of the most important factors. Third is being a safe country for international students, so we know that can potentially mean that's a bit of a negative for the United States. Support for international students comes in at number 4. Part-time work opportunities at 5, and in 6th place, welcoming people from other countries as the primary factors. Those are the top 6 primary factors. So that quality issue is important when we look at the role of post-study work in student choice. And this is the availability of employment routes after graduation. And when students were asked globally, the availability of a post-study work visa is the main or influencing factor in where they study. 63% said that will be main or influencing factor as availability of post-study work, and that that's over 70% of students that are planning to study abroad saying 72% are saying that they will apply for post-study work visa. So those are two important distinctions for those that are about to go. So that almost 45%, basically almost half, would consider changing their destination if the duration of post-study work visa was shortened. So that is significant. And not just the availability of it, but if there's threats to reduce the amount of time that the students are going to have on post-study work, that can be an even more significant differentiator in terms of what's going to impact where students will choose to go. So I think that speaks a lot to how, again, just that awareness we need to have of what those challenges are and concerns are within individual markets that are top on our recruitment priority list. So that covers about what we have for you today in terms of content for the Roundup. And we appreciate all of you being faithful watchers, either live or on repeat. Those of you who subscribe to the audio-only podcast version of the Roundup, thank you for putting us close to 2,500 downloads. Very excited about those that have been subscribing to the podcast version as well. So thanks for making SMIE Consulting an important part of your international edification this week. And just a quick heads up, I'll be on campus at UNLV next week. So I'll be recording hopefully a live shot there of what's going on campus and what we're doing on the international education planning stage for our next year, and how we're looking to grow our team, and a really exciting time at UNLV for international education. So we'll be live next week. The following week we'll be live from London. We'll be attending the BMI Global Scholarship Summit that's happening. We're sponsoring scholarship organizations from all over the world. We'll be coming to London, and I'll be meeting with a number of them, 24 or 5 or 6 of them, over a 2-day period to talk about how we can be a destination for some of their scholarship students. So important times. The next 2 remotes will be, our midweek roundups will be virtual from on location on campus at UNLV, and from the BMI Global Scholarship Summit in London. So until next time, we wish you the very best and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Cheers.